Welcome to another episode of the Thrive Now show, where we have conversations to talk about what is going to take for humanity to rise and thrive now. I am really excited today to have Susan Mercer, who is a dear friend of mine, but also a producer in a couple of films. She is the founder of Modern Outlooks and is a best-selling author, a co-producer of There's Got to Be More to Life. If you haven't seen the film, make sure that you check it out. There will be links in the show notes, so make sure it's a must-see film. Susan provides services as an end-of-life advocate, life coach, intuitive medium, and she's also an interior designer. Her abilities to connect with individuals enables her to assist many clients through their life transitions, whether it's redesigning a home, transforming their room, coaching them through life's upheavals, arranging a tribute, Premorial, or guiding loved ones through the dying process. Susan takes the time to listen to each person and assist them in making their decisions with clarity, thoughtfulness, and love. Welcome, Susan.
Hello, Jennifer. Thank you.
It's great to have you here today. So, I'm super intrigued to have, you have a pretty eclectic background. You started out in interior design and then you evolved into doing the work that you do today, as a life coach, as a medium, as an intuitive. So how did you go from being an interior designer to what you're doing today?
So through the interior design process, it is really important to listen to the client first and foremost and find out what they want to bring into their home, what's lacking, what works for them. So my goal in doing the interior design was to really listen, take their ideas and incorporate it in their house in their best way possible. So actually, when I would leave their home, it didn't look like a designer was there. It looked like it was their home, felt like them. And that was my goal, which made me stand out a little differently from other designers. They like to leave their mark. My business at the time was Panache Interiors. Panache is like leave it, the feather in the cap. So I would leave some aspect that was a little bit different there. Unexpected piece, unexpected artwork that just was like, oh, wow, look at that pop of color. And in doing so, I found people really just want to be heard at the end of the day. And I think that has a lot to do with what we're finding now. There is so much diversity, there's so much discord, that if we just all agreed to disagree, even, we'd be in a much different place. So that's what led me to the coaching and the other things that I've done.
Yeah, say some more about the discord. It's interesting. I'd love to explore the conversations that no one wants to have with you, because you and I have had, a similar situation actually in the making of the film, There's Got to Be More to Life. So for those of you who don't know, There's Got to Be More to Life is an inspirational, transformational film about how you can rise up from trauma in your life. And it features several experts, and it actually showcases my story and how I rose up from a terrorist attack at the Boston Marathon bombings. And Susan and I had met prior to, actually after the marathon bombings happened. We were in a training course together and we developed a friendship from there. And from that friendship, we actually produced Folds of Honor, which you can see in your backdrop. Folds of Honor is an amazing film showcasing a nonprofit organization called Folds of Honor. And their whole mission is to provide education to the children and spouses of the fallen or disabled veterans. And so both Susan and I are passionate about veterans and veteran causes and, helping veterans actually. And so that was a project that we got involved in. I felt it brought us even closer together in our relationship. And then fast forward, after producing that film, I was inspired a few years later to actually direct and produce my very first film, which is called There's Got to Be More to Life. So if you haven't seen it, make sure that you check it out. It's a great holiday. It's a great film to watch, especially over the holidays. And actually talking about discord, so I invited you to be a co-producer in helping me bring the film to life. Let's start there. Like, what had you get involved in the project?
Honestly, I believed in your story up until you having this idea to do this. I really didn't know your story. And to see where you, who you are, the person you were when I first met you, what you had gone through, and how you really rose up and decided to make different choices than what other people might have done by, looking for natural healing, for not settling for, and it's just, it works for some people, but not settling for taking the pill and having to take a pill for the rest of your life. Resonated a lot with me because that's how I live. Looking at the emotional component of a physical ailment. So I felt an instant connection there and a resonance. And then it was like, well, I believe in what you're doing and your story, where you were before I met you, where you were then, and then even where you are now. And to me, that's enlightening. It's inspiring. It inspires me to live different every day. And I feel I can inspire a lot of other people as well. And it needs to be out there. And that was really why I got on board.
Thank you for believing in me, and thank you for believing in the project, and thank you for playing such a key role. And now we're gonna actually pull back the curtain for the listeners out there, right? So you think, well, creating a film is, of course it has its challenging moments to it, but one might think it's like this Hollywood glam, and it's just all fun and roses. And let's be clear, folks, it's not. It's interesting, especially when you create a documentary that is solely intended to inspire and encourage and transform people, anybody that watches it, right? So by making that bold intention, which we all did, myself and everybody that's associated with this project, had this bold intention that anybody who watched the film would absolutely have the experience of being inspired and encouraged and empowered, that no matter what they had been through in their life, whether it be a loss of a loved one, whether it had been, an illness, whether it was a loss of a job, whether it was, from, a terrorist attack, it doesn't matter the event. That's what I want people to understand. The event, it's not about, whose trauma is worse than others. Guys, trauma is trauma. And I have come to understand that everyone on the planet has been traumatized on some level. On some level. We're not immune to it. And so it's not about comparing, well, mine might not be as earth-shattering as, mine was. But the truth is, we all have this experience of, how do you rise up from the traumatic experience? Well, fast forward, we were actually on scene in Sedona. Sedona was one of the sites that we chose to do the filming because of the energy vortexes and because of what it symbolizes. And we wanted the film to be steeped in high vibrational frequency so that the listener and the viewer actually would experience that while they're watching the film. They might not fully recognize it or realize it, but just through sitting through literally every aspect of the making of the film was steeped in a high vortex energy environment. That was the intention. So here we are, fast forward, we have most of the production team in Sedona. We decided it would be a really great idea to all stay in the same house. So we rented a huge house in Sedona. It was absolutely gorgeous in the foothills in one of the vortexes. And lo and behold, Susan, something happened. Here's the thing. What I love about what we're about to share is that I don't even remember the incident anymore, but something happened between you and I got triggered. I don't even recall what happened, but I got triggered, I got upset, and I basically stormed out of the house. And in the process, here, we have a house full of people, and here thinking you and I are having the issue, but what was your experience like when this whole ordeal unfolded?
That's the interesting part, Jennifer, about triggers, right? You think it's just your trigger. Well, there were, I think, 5 other of us in the house, and everybody had a response to that trigger. That your trigger triggered someone else's trigger of an experience that they thought they had healed. Which, so, we look at triggers of like, oh, damn, you want to just run away and not really face it, right? Yet in the taking that moment, good to leave, figure out whatever it is that you need, and then to come back and say, okay, what just happened here? And how do we move through it? So whether you're in, with your family or whomever, things are going to come up. I mean, just we all have different experiences, and it's what you do with that experience at the time. So you can stay mad, you can stay bitter, you can stay running away, but at the end of the day, that doesn't solve anything, mostly for you, for the person who's triggered. So to be able to come back, and it was such a, it was interesting because it happened right in the beginning of when we were all together. Yet I feel that it really set the tone to move forward, because we were all able to be more authentic, I think, to be more compassionate, be willing to listen again, because the listening to me is key in anything, and to meet the person where they're at, not where you want them to be, not where you wish them to be, but where they're at that moment. And be like, okay, what happened? Now, how do we, by you doing that, this happened. And so how do you then move on? And the only way to move on is by taking the pause, meeting the person where they're at, listening with an ear of compassion. You don't have to agree with that, but just to have that compassion.
Well, and here's the thing, right? I'd like to break it down even further, right? Because what I now remember, something happened, and I perceived that you raised your voice in a manner in which reminded me of my childhood. And it was the way in which my stepmother used to yell at me that had a visceral effect to me. Now, I don't recall you necessarily yelling at me, but something in that experience triggered a childhood memory. And for those of you that don't know, when we were making the film, we all got really vulnerable with each other, and we all had to have, my experience was, we had to leave our trauma at the door, or at least be willing to work through our trauma, I should say, and not pretend like it wasn't there. And so I never in a million years expected that I would get triggered by just the tone of voice. And here's the thing, and Susan pointed to it. My old pattern or way of being when that would happen is I would want to run and hide. I'd want to avoid. I'd want to pretend like nothing was wrong, because I didn't necessarily know how to deal with that as a young girl, and even as a young adult. So I conditioned myself to not deal with it, and to pretend like it didn't happen, and to put this facade on. But the truth is, we made a vow to each other that we would, deal with whatever came up during the making of this film. And so I wanted to be a woman of my word and integrity. So I had to take a time out, literally, to ground myself, get myself centered, process my emotions. There were a lot of emotions, combination of anger and sadness. But here's the thing. What eventually happened, and I did not see this right away, but what eventually happened is that Susan gifted me with the opportunity to rise above those childhood memories, and basically do the work to release that. So I didn't have that visceral effect. Now, here's the thing. When this whole ordeal happened, I did leave the house, and I apparently slammed the door on the way out. I wasn't aware that I did that intentionally, but needless to say, I slammed the door. Well, little did I know that slamming the door would trigger one of the other producers of the film and reminded her of a traumatic experience where that happened. So now this like ripple effect started to take place in the house. And then when I returned back, my experience was most everyone was on eggshells. Now, what do we do? And then we eventually got to a place where you and I were able to have a conversation. And I love what you spoke about, Susan, about listening. I think that a lot of us, myself included, could actually learn or master listening even more than I do today. God gifted us with 2 ears and 1 mouth. I tend to rattle my mouth a lot. I talk a lot. My mom will say I came out of the womb talking. But to listen is to fully listen and not interrupt the other person. And that's something that you've certainly helped me with. Is I tend to, especially in a confrontational or in a conflicting situation, I want to rush to explain myself. I want to rush to defend myself. I want to rush to, justify whatever, as opposed to just listening how my actions or inactions, what that did to you. And listening from a place of non-judgment, listening of myself and you. And that takes some discipline, actually, and it takes some awareness and some presence. And I think that is one of the things that I hope listeners take away, is to listen, to fully hear what the other person's saying so that they feel validated and they feel heard.
Exactly.
We tend to, I tend to, in the past, I would have been like rushed to like poo-poo your feelings and your emotions because I didn't want to be with the upset of it, because it reminded me too much of, my past, and I wanted to avoid it. But this is where, the whole notion of conversations people don't want to have. But when we are willing to lean in, it actually opens us up to be authentic, to be vulnerable. And in my experience, it actually deepens the connection once we are able to work through, what had transpired. And I remember, you and I spoke and we mended fences on our side, but then this wasn't on the agenda. But we decided, because of that whole experience, we decided to sit down, all of us, around the couch for an hour-long discussion on conversations no one wants to have. And do you remember what happened when we did that?
It was actually really interesting, the magic that unfolded. And one of the keys, you spoke of this earlier too, was that you had to really, even if you chose not to hear, you needed to wait until the person was complete with their thought, sentence, feeling before you could give feedback. And what's fascinating when that happens is what you think you want to answer or you think you want to say changes, because you're not interrupting them. Like we're so, we got to get our word in. Like you had said, we've got to, defend why we did what we did. Well, hang on. If you just wait and take that pause, wait till the person's finished, you come from a different place, because now you're not in reactive, you're not defending, you're actually, I found with me at least, that I was in a place more of neutrality. And so there isn't all that, I have to get my 2 cents in. And you also come from a place, and I think everyone I can't speak for everyone, but for myself, my perception was that we're not trying to change people's minds about how they feel. We're accepting, okay, you felt that way. I certainly was not my intention for you to feel that way. And I'm sorry that that's how that was communicated, because that was not where I was coming from. And I think when that happens and there's that dialogue, there's also a softening. Because I felt that we could all soften because we understood that because I perceived it to be a certain way, that wasn't what the intention was. And so it shifts.
And this is a key point, and I want to dissect this a little bit more so that the listeners really understand this. You just said what you said, but it was in the tone of voice that reminded me of my childhood, right? And so in that moment, whether I was fully aware of it or not, I'm not certain at this point in time, but it, like, boom, it brought me back there. And then I had an automatic way of being around it. It's not safe. I've got to go. I've got to go now, right? And I've got to defend, or I've got to speak up, or whatever. And when I spoke to you about this, you were like, but I wasn't yelling. To you, you weren't.
Right.
To you, you weren't. But then when I allowed myself to be vulnerable with you, and by the way, this takes a lot of courage, guys, because we, as human beings, we fear being judged and criticized. And and at the end of the day, we all want to belong, right? So for me to actually, as an adult, to admit to you, that experience reminded me of a little girl. And then I had a choice. I could hold back and suppress those memories that were flooding to the surface, which was how I used to deal with things. But it was coming to the surface to be dealt with in this moment. But it was a scary place for me because I didn't want to remember that, to be candid. Most of us don't want to remember our traumatic experiences. We just want to run from them and, never look at them again. And when we can embrace it and recognize that I wouldn't be the woman I am today if I hadn't gone through what I've gone through. Now, let's be clear. Do I wish, what I had gone through to anyone else? Absolutely not. Would you wish some of the things that you've experienced on anyone else? No. But these things shape us. They create us to who we are today. And I look at now and I'm like, each of these experiences has helped me become a better human being.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's the opportunity here. Now, it would have been really easy for me to fall back into my old patterns of, okay, it's not safe for me to be friends with Susan anymore because she reminded me of something that was such a visceral, strong hold for me. But by leaning in, she gifted me the experience of being able to rise above it newly now. And then as a result of that, my experience when I did open up was, my fear was I'd be judged and criticized, or, you're making a mountain out of molehill. That's one of the things that, you're making. But the truth is they were my feelings. And so I was afraid to speak up for fear that all these things were going to happen, but the opposite happened. I found you were compassionate. I found like, oh, I can see now where my tone of voice would have triggered you. Not my intent, not at all on the radar, but now all of a sudden, and then we had to talk through, okay, well, I don't want you to ever feel like you're on eggshells, Susan, right? So I remember we had a deeper conversation about, when I feel triggered, I'm going to actually just tell you, hey, you know what, Susan, I just got triggered. I need a timeout, or I need a pause. So that because if I didn't speak up and say that, you would be left thinking like, what did I do? What just happened? I don't understand. And then you go through this own your own process of second guessing yourself or doubting yourself. And you're like, but what did I do? I'm not even aware of what I did. And the truth is, it's not about what you did or didn't do. It's just something happened in the moment.
And by you also pointing it out, like I didn't have, honestly, the awareness sometimes of and it comes up sometimes in the coaching, honestly, where my guides, I'm listening to this other realm and they're emphatic about things, and so it comes through as being emphatic, right? And so now I've learned to temper that, because of just like, okay, I got it, and there's ways to deliver it. So it was a good learning piece for me too, to be like, okay, you can be emphatic, but just temper it. And so it's been interesting that way too. So it's always a learning experience. I didn't get offended. It was just like, I didn't hear myself that way. And so now I'm more aware, and what a gift that was as a result. And it really comes into, and this is where, I feel that our friendship has come to, is there was, even with the triggers, there's always been a level of trust. And so I think to trust in each other, and also even more so with each other, is trust in our own self. That we are okay, that we are safe, that we are protected, is just having that reminder. So once you trust yourself, then trusting someone else becomes easier, I feel like. And there's certain people that you learn that just aren't going to resonate anyway. So there's maybe different levels of trust, and knowing how far you can go or how much to push.
I think you bring up a really good point about trust, right? So trust actually can be a little bit different. I agree with what you just said, but for me, so I had an experience when I was 11 years old where I was sexually assaulted by a man and two women who I didn't know. So in that experience, I made it mean, and as an 11-year-old girl, that it's not safe, and I can't trust, women or men to do the right thing. By the way, I had evidence of other experiences in my life where that were quote unquote true. So what I did was I developed a facade. I developed an identity and a way of being that basically even though I had a lot of people around me and I was very, it was easy for me to connect to people, I always kept people at arm's length, always in the past, because that was my safety net. So it was like, I can only trust me and not trust others. So for me, the making of this film actually challenged my ability to trust others, particularly, women, because when that experience happened, I also made it mean that women aren't going to come to my rescue, because they didn't in that scenario. Right. And so, and my life was threatened, and the life of my loved ones was threatened. So I took that seriously. So for me, so trust absolutely can be what you just described. And for me, my learning, particularly as an adult, and particularly in the last 9 years, is trusting others. The bombings happen, and I would say, one of the many gifts that came from that horrific experience. So yes, you can have a horrific experience and you can still see the good and the gifts that come from that. They're both true. And for me, the gift was I wasn't able to take care of myself after that. I didn't have any of the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. I literally, the universe and God put me in a situation where I had to very quickly learn how to trust others, and actually strangers. Kind of like, so interestingly enough, What if that were the antidote for what happened when I was 11?
Yeah.
Right. And so learning how to trust and to be vulnerable with other people, and that they'll really come out and do the right thing and not hurt you, right? Like, as an adult, and as I'm sitting here talking to you today, consciously, I'm like, yeah, well, of course I trust you. But there's still an aspect of my inner child, that little girl, that isn't 100% trusting. So I've got to be able to acknowledge that and be able to express that, and to be able to move through it. And I think the other piece that we're talking about here is expressing authenticity, expressing emotions. It's okay to express when you're upset. I got to say, like, just in the making of the film in particular, up to this point, you have gifted me with so many different things. One is, seeing, triggers from my childhood, number one. But number two, like, this really listening. You have set a very healthy boundary of, what it really means to listen. Like, I'm not done talking yet. I want, sit tight, because I want to finish expressing myself before you jump in. Because I'd be quick to jump in, early on in our relationship. And I'm not saying I'm perfect at this stage, but I will say that I'm more keenly aware and present with, when someone's speaking, let them finish. And then give them a chance to respond afterwards. And so thank you for that, because I've come to value listening more than talking.
No, it's where we get most of our wisdom actually is from listening, whether it, having conversations, and it also is really listening to yourself. If we're always in the doing or always in the speaking, we're missing what, and if you're a spiritual person, you get this with guides, we all have an inner wisdom. And so if you're always doing the speaking, then you're missing what your inner wisdom has to say. And that's the piece that I've learned the most and that I found the most valuable. So even when I think that I need to have some response, there's that little voice inside that says, well, what about this? And then having those words come through oftentimes will be that gem that other person needs to hear. That's the fascinating piece, and that's about taking the pause and letting the person finish, and not be the reactor, not being the defender, being that neutral, in that neutral space, to then hear what needs to come through. Some people call it guided speech. I know there's been situations with my parents, with even my kids, when there's something that needs to be addressed, and I just take the pause and say, let whatever needs to come out with love and compassion. And I call that guided speech. It's amazing what happens through that as well. It's a great tool to have. And even if that seems a little far-fetched, great, just take the pause before you get ready to react or confront someone. Just breathe and take that pause and see how that makes a difference.
Yeah, love it. So what words of wisdom would you say to listeners of what does it take to rise up from adversity? One. Two, from your perspective, what's it going to take for humanity to shift out of survival mode into thriving mode?
So they're definitely interconnected. So to shift from adversity is to own it. If something's not going your way, instead of, like you had you had said earlier too, like, don't go into avoidance. Feel your feelings. If you're feeling sad, feel sad. Even if you're supposed to put on that happy face, or you're supposed to go to the party, don't go to the party and just stay home and feel sad. And in doing that, though, just feel sad and don't become a victim to the sadness. Now, when I say that, so there's two different things. I feel sad versus I am sad. So you really can't, sad's not a noun, right? It's a verb, something that you feel, it's an emotion. So feel it. Then once you feel it, you acknowledge it. Oh, sadness, there you are again. It dissipates because it doesn't have that hold. The place of where humanity is at the moment in the survival mode is coming from a place of victimhood. The world's against me. I'm never going to get ahead. Why is that person doing better than me? So you're in comparison. Again, if you can just take the pause, look at where your life is, even if it seems like it's at the very bottom. If you got up in the morning, that's a win. You woke up, and be grateful. If you're fortunate enough to have food on the table, I have food on the table for this moment, I'm not hungry, and be grateful. The more gratitude and acknowledgement that we bring into our lives at the moment, the more will come in. Because we're not really meant to live in struggle, I don't feel.
I don't feel that either. I feel like I feel our birthright is thriving, but we've lost it along the way. And I believe, like you do, that we got caught up in our trauma, whether it's childhood trauma or young adult trauma, and we became victims, whether consciously or unconsciously, victims to our circumstances. And then we've been trying to shelter and protect ourselves from having those experiences again, and all we're doing is slowly dying. We're actually not living. We're not, it's fascinating, because here's the thing, right? Do you remember, all the different accidents that you've had in your life, whether you fell or you were in a fender bender, or, do you remember every single one, when they happened and all that stuff?
Pretty much. Thankfully, I haven't had a whole lot of them, knock on wood, but yes, I remember.
Well, it's interesting because we remember that, it's like we create stories about things, right? Like, and then we live from those stories as if they're true. When we can learn to be present in this now moment, what happened yesterday. Learn from it, be grateful from it. And to your point, Susan, right? Gratitude. Fascinating. I actually won an award for gratitude before the bombings happened. But after the bombings happened, I couldn't access gratitude to save my life.
Mhm.
I remember saying, what are you grateful for? What am I grateful for? Well, I couldn't come up with anything right away. It took some time. It was like, digging for gold. It wasn't at the surface. I had to really, really sit in solitude and ask, what am I grateful for? And I had to work through a lot of what I wasn't grateful for to then finally get to, oh, right, I'm grateful for my family and friends who were right there to support me the best that they could. I'm grateful for the complete strangers that sent the most beautiful cards expressing their heartfelt prayers and love for all of us. Who does that, right? I was grateful. So I saw a different side of humanity, but it took me time to be able to see that. But the more that we can stay in gratitude, and a very, very simple exercise is pick 3 to 5 things every day that you're
Right.
grateful for.
Yeah.
And if you want to, you can do it when you wake up in the morning, and you can do it at the end of the day, or you can do it when you're feeling down. Oh, in this moment, what am I grateful for in this moment? You might be having a big challenge with a spouse or a loved one, or a challenge at work. Like, what am I grateful in this moment? I'm grateful I can take a time out and pause. I'm grateful for my breath. I'm grateful for, because the truth is we actually live in abundance, but we've forgotten it.
Mhm. So true. And that's, I think that survivor mode is, where everything's about lack, don't have enough of whatever. Where look around you, whether it's, it was interesting. I lived in California for a while, and there was always the drought and the lack of water. And it was like, has anybody been to the Pacific Ocean lately? Like, really? We don't have enough water? Like, how can that, it's just I mean, it's one small example, and it's how can that be? And then when you take that moment and you look at nature, what we breathe out, plants and trees breathe in, and then what they breathe out, we breathe in. It's like, so everything is all interconnected. And if it's interconnected, then how can there be that discourse? So when you are reminded, when you bring yourself to gratitude, and then I've even taken it a step further lately of every day, or when I'm laying in bed at night, I do my gratitude list. And I also like, well, what was one of my wins today? So it's the gratitude, but then what did I do that was a win? And that just even sets the day even better. And then, okay, now what's my intention, my one word for tomorrow? And it might be productivity. It might even be play, or fun, or I'm going to, whatever. So that then sets you up for the nice tone of the next day. And you get up and it's like, okay, this is a productive day, day of productivity. So what does that look like? And then you move into your day. And I find that sets me up in just a much better way of living. And we are meant to live, like you had said, and we are meant to thrive. And it's really noticing the small things, hearing a bird chirp, noticing a flower that might not have been on the rose bush the day before. Like, that may seem all menial, but that's being in touch. That's seeing, hearing, using your senses, and not walking around like a zombie, which we tend to do.
Yeah, and I would say, if for those of you that are listening out there, if you want to take it to a whole nother level, right? So you've got gratitude and you've got the win, and take it to another level to layer on is, what do you love and appreciate about yourself? I think that is such a missing, out in humanity, is that being able to express and honor self and others. I could very easily express love for others. I've been able to do that pretty consistently. But I had really struggled with being able to show love and appreciation for myself, because I had a lot of, my inner critic was nasty. And I've learned to tame her. But one thing to level up is to, what do I love and appreciate about myself? Doesn't mean you don't make mistakes, but that that you too deserve that. And when you start to cultivate these very simple but yet profound practices, your life will start to transform.
Absolutely. Yeah, when you have compassion for yourself, it's much easier to have compassion for someone else.
Absolutely.
But everything starts from within.
Yeah. So I want to end on two things. One is, I want to express another layer of gratitude for you, Susan. So I remember Susan was like my anchor during the making of the film. We had so many different adversities and challenges. And I remember one, we had everything lined up, ready to go for our filming in Sedona. And less than 2 weeks before, I get a phone call from our cinematographer that said, I had a family emergency. I can't come to Sedona. Now, I mean, time and money had been invested in securing, permits that we needed, to getting the housing that we needed. Like everything was ready to go. That happened. And then we found out that there were wildfires happening also. And I'm like, now what? Now what? Like, if I change this, we're out money, we're out time. Like, all I could see, at that moment was what couldn't happen actually. And I remember calling you in a bit of despair, going, now what do I do? And you were just so calm and grounded. And you were like, oh, it just means someone else is going to show up, and the next perfect person is going to show up. And I'm like, are you in touch with reality, Susan? I'm like, there is less than 2 weeks, and I don't need just any cinematographer. I need a cinematographer who can hold the kind of space that we need to do the kind of filming that we're going to do in Sedona. It can't just be anyone off the street. And do you remember what you said?
Something like, just breathe into it, ask the universe to show you or bring you somebody. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I mean, it was just like, but you were so grounded and you were just so matter of fact, and you were like, oh, that just means that, so, there's someone else is, better suited for this piece. And I'm like, what? And I just remember going, because my corporate business planning side of things was totally like, but you reminded me again in the moment that we can create our reality.
Yeah.
And what unfolded was, we didn't miss the filming. The fires actually ended up burning out just before we arrived, and the next best cinematographer just so happened to be part of Anthony Bourdain's team, and just so happened to be in the area, and just so happened to be available, and just so happened to be was willing to, do it at the price that we were willing to pay. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, folks.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty. And so that's one of the many things I'm grateful for you, Susan. And I will end it on what I love and appreciate about you, Susan, is that you are a pillar of strength. You are an anchor, and just like this tuning fork, really. So when I'm feeling out of sorts and like feeling out of control, frankly, and how am I going to make this happen, you remind me of what's possible, and you remind me and encourage me that I've got this. And so I just want to acknowledge you and say thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's taken me a while to get to where I am, and all learning, still learning. Life is an evolution. It's a constant journey. When you're at the end, it may be the end of your breath, but to me, it's now the beginning of something other. So it's just, so once I think when we can fully embrace that it's a journey, it just all comes together. And so I am so grateful that my journey has included you in it, and helped me navigate, and just, by you acknowledging, and thank you for that, it reminds me to keep doing what I do, even in my own life, to just keep being that ground, keep being that center. So thank you. And it gives me the awesome pleasure of seeing us all blossom and grow and share. And, it's, I love it. I love life. I love the people that are in it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for being on the show today. Thank you for, being willing to be vulnerable and have, the conversations that, or, to resurrect the conversation that people don't want to have, so that we can really be a vessel for encouraging, empowering other people that are going through a similar situation, like what's possible. So thank you for your willingness to be on the show today. Thank you for your authenticity and just who you are in the world. And remember, folks, so tune in to the Thrive Now show. We air once a week, every Thursday, Thrive Thursdays. Don't forget 2 films that you must put on your watch list: Folds of Honor, Freedom Isn't Free. You can find that on Amazon Prime. The other one is called There's Got to Be More to Life. You literally can type in there's got to be more to life.com, or go to riseandthriveproductions.com, and you can actually watch both of those films during during this holiday season and coming into the new year. So thank you and have an amazing day. And here's to everyone thriving.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Cool.